aggregates, but rather raga, the word raga originally means or meant color. And so viraga means losing its color. It's like a cloth or a piece of article of clothing. When you've washed it over and over, then maybe it was bright red when you started, but in time, especially in ancient India, when they would use not the chemical dyes like we use today, but natural dyes. So when clothes get washed over and over, then they virujati, they fade away. The dye comes out from them. And so this can apply metaphorically to all of the aggregates, that each of them fades away, even when one perceives them at subtler and subtler levels. Even from one second to the next, they're fading away or disappearing. And so for this reason, they're said to be, I think this is anasasika, which means comfortless, that they're sort of not a basis of complete security. If we cling to them, hoping to find full security, perfect security in them, then the body falls away, feelings, we get painful feelings, we get disagreeable perceptions. Sometimes our mind gets out of control, so we have no control of our volition. So all of the five aggregates are sort of subject to misery and to some kind of suffering. So they're comfortless. So having known the five aggregates in this way, then one gives up and relinquishes attraction and clinging to them. Actually, attraction and clinging, these are just two aspects of attachment. And then comes the mental standpoints. The mental standpoints would be the standpoints from which one regards the five aggregates to be I, mine, and myself. So through these mental standpoints, one looks at the body as being mine. Feeling is mine, perceptions is mine, volitions is mine, consciousness is mine. Or we take the five aggregates collectively to be a solid, substantial I. And then based on these notions of I and mine, then we build up conceptions of ourself. You know, what am I really like? What is my true self? And this seems to have been like a particular weakness in India during the Buddha's time, where the philosophers and the ascetic contemplatives of the period were building up many different theories about the true nature of the self. The self is infinite, self is finite, the self is eternal, the self is perishable, the self is essentially blissful, the self experiences bliss and misery, and so on. So many different theories of the self. And even in Western philosophy, we have, the Cartesian theory of the self, Leibnizian, idealist, empiricist, different theories of the self. And so these are different standpoints. All the Buddha will say is based on misunderstandings or misconceptions relating to the five aggregates. Okay, so we have mental standpoints. Adherences, basically very similar to attachment and clinging. And then come the underlying tendencies. These would be the underlying tendencies. Sometimes the text mentions 3 underlying tendencies, which are the tendencies to attachment, to aversion, and to ignorance. And so in the case of the Arahat, he's one who's relinquished all of this attraction and clinging, the mental standpoints, adherences, and underlying tendencies regarding the five aggregates. Any questions now about this part of the discourse?
Bhante, you just said underlying tendencies to attachment, aversion, and what was the third?
Ignorance.
Thank you.
Yeah, in other suttas, 7 underlying tendencies are mentioned. I have to see if I can remember them all. I think 1 then becomes sensual desire, then comes attachment to continued existence, views, doubt, conceit, ignorance. That's 6. I said views, right? Anybody remember the 7th? Kamaraga, patiga, bhavaraga, titi. I think doubt is 1. Did I say doubt? I think doubt is the 7th. Let me cheat. (202). Oh yeah, the underlying tendency to lust, to aversion, to doubt, to conceit. Then comes the desire for being, or I call this now the craving for individual existence, and the underlying tendency to ignorance. So those are the 7. Any further questions? Okay, then let us go on to the next section. Okay, so again, now we're in section 7. So again, the Buddha says that when a monk speaks in this way, one may delight and rejoice in his words, but now one should question him further. And now the question is going to be posed in terms of what are called the 6 elements. So one says that there are these 6 elements rightly proclaimed by the Bhagava, the Blessed One, the Buddha. What are the 6? They are the earth element, the water element, the fire element, the air element, the space element, and the consciousness element. So you see, the Buddha he proposes different ways of looking at the totality of experience. The most common scheme, of course, that we come across is the 5 aggregates, in which, when we take the 5 aggregates, we could see that there's a preponderance, that the stress or emphasis is upon dissecting the mental side of experience. And all of the material side of existence is grouped together under just the 1 aggregate of rupa, material form. But with the scheme of the 6 elements, now we're dissecting or analyzing more thoroughly the material side of experience, and the whole mental side of experience is just sort of grouped under the heading of consciousness. And so here we have 4 primary elements. The 4 primary elements are, they're called, we use these conventional terms, earth, water, fire, and air. Those were the terms that were used, for generations before the time of the Buddha, maybe going back to the Vedas, the Brahmanas, the Upanishads. And so the Buddha took over this terminology, but the way the Buddhist tradition understands the 4 primary elements, it's not like just, the ground, bodies of water, fire, and the air, but rather these are taken to be, I call them 4 behavioral modes of any kind of material substance. So in any material substance, we have some aspect of solidity or resistance to pressure, or we could call it substance, some aspect of substance. So we can, through the sense of touch, we experience this as being different degrees of hardness, softness, and so on. So even if one takes a cup of water, so it seems to be, you might think it's an example of the water element, but even in that cup of water, if we compress it very, very hard, it'll turn to ice. Or if we compress it, there'll come a point of maximum resistance where we can't press anymore. That's because there's the presence of the earth element there, which is resisting the pressure. And so even water has the earth element. Let me just go through the 4 elements. So the earth element is the aspect of, I call it material substance, the aspect of solidity, the aspect of resistance to pressure. Then the water element is explained to be that aspect of matter which is responsible for cohesion, for the binding together of the particles of matter. I think the way the ancient Indians came to identify the water element with the aspect of cohesion is that they would observe, because they have experience making what they call rotis, or also they call chapati, chapati. Or maybe this would be like our pancakes. This is the flatbread. When you put the powder or the flour on the board, the rolling board, when it's dry and a wind blows, it will scatter the flour. Nothing is holding the flour together. But then when you sprinkle water on it, and then knead it together, then it forms a kind of paste, the dough. And then you roll the dough on the board and it forms you have to shape it to be round, but all of the dough will hold together. And so it seems that it's the water element which is enabling the pieces of flour, the particles of flour, to bind together. Okay, then what's called the fire element is the aspect of heat, by which any material body has some degree of heat. Even if we go below 0, 100 degrees below 0, as long as we're above absolute 0, then there's some degree of heat in the body. That is the presence of the fire element. And then what's called the air element or the wind element is the aspect of oscillation or vibration, the aspect of movement. And so all material, all matter in the perspective of early Buddhism is seen to be in some way in motion. So even when we have this lid on the table at some degree is very subtle level, it's vibrating, moving back and forth. The particles within this lid, the molecules and atoms are moving around, moving back and forth. And of course we see the air element most obviously within the in and out breathing, but it's also said to be working through all of the cells of the body. Okay, so in any kind of matter, we have these four elements. The earth element is what provides the sort of substance of the particles of matter. The water element is the force of binding or cohesion. The heat element is the degree, or the fire element is the degree of heat within any kind of material body. And the air element is what is responsible for movement, vibration, oscillation. And then the space element here usually is taken not to be what we call the all-embracing space, but it's taken to be the space in the sense of the emptiness between the particles of matter. Not emptiness in the sense of sunyata, the philosophical sense, but just the empty where there's space not occupied by any kind of material body. That is the space element. And then it seems here that the consciousness element, has to be understood in a very broad way as amongst the five aggregates, not just the aspect of consciousness, but also as including, along with it, feeling, perception, and volitions. Otherwise, we don't have a complete scheme. Okay, so then the Buddha says that the monk should ask the one declaring arhatship, how have you known, how have you seen regarding these six elements? And the monk who is declaring arhatship should declare, it uses the expression, I have treated the earth element as not self, with no self based on the earth element. I think the word treated, this must come from Venerable Nyanamoli. If I remember, the Pali word is upagacchati, which means approach. But I think we could use the word regarded would work as well, maybe more naturally in English. So I have regarded the earth element as not self and no self based on the earth element. And so now one is focusing upon the six elements entirely by way of the characteristic of not self. And then through this insight, he says, with the destruction, fading away, cessation, giving up and relinquishing of attraction and clinging based on the earth element, again the destruction, giving up of mental standpoints, adherences and underlying tendencies based on the earth element, I have understood that my mind is liberated. And then the same is said with regard to all of the other elements. Okay, any questions on this section? Please. What is your name?
Daniel,
Daniel.
can you just expand upon the precise definition of what it means by attraction and clinging based on each of the elements, like how that's associated with the elements as opposed to other things?
Yeah,
the
actually,
five
that's a
aggregates?
good question. The question is how to expand on the meaning of attraction and repulsion in regard to each of the elements. Because normally it seems we don't, focus in on the elements individually and become attracted and repelled by them. In fact, maybe this passage has to be taken not exactly literally, but we sort of have to extrapolate from it. Because usually I think what happens is that attraction and repulsion are based upon the perception of the physical body as a whole. So usually, say, the man sees a lovely, pretty girl, and he becomes attracted to the pretty girl. The young girl sees the handsome man, becomes attracted to the man, or just elsewise on physical appearances, people like each other, dislike each other, because they're sometimes focusing upon the body as a whole. But now I think the approach that one would use would be to analyze the body if one wants to gain detachment from it in terms of the material elements. And so, suppose that I'm angry with a person, and so I have some kind of resentment against that person. Whenever I see that person, I get upset, angry, don't like the person. If I'm in the room, that person comes into the room, then I get upset and I feel the impulse to get up and walk out. Okay, but now, in order to dispel that repulsion, what I do is, take this person and say, what is it that I'm actually angry with? Then I look, there's this being that I identify with the person, but what is really there? When that person comes into the room, there's the earth element. The earth element is just, if we look at in terms of the physical body, it will be what's prominent in, for example, in the muscles, the bones, the tissues, the organs, the heart, the liver, stomach, lungs, the liver, intestines, the muscles of the legs, the shins, bones of the legs and feet. Can I be angry with a bunch of tissue and bones? No. And then one could take the water element. So the water element, most prominent in the blood, the sweat, the oils of the body, the lymph, the inner fluids. Do I get angry or attracted to the fluids of the body? No. When the person comes in, he brings in, a degree of heat, 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit heat. Do I get angry with the heat? No. And then the person is the air element, most obvious in the breathing in and out. Do I get angry with his breathing in and out? No. And then, of course, there'll be the spaces that that person brings in, the empty space in the lungs and the stomach, the very small spaces within the head, the nostrils, the mouth. Do I get angry with that? No. And then there's the consciousness element. Of course, maybe some features of his character I don't like, but if we just, dissect the character down into his feelings, his perceptions, his volitions, his consciousness, then I don't get angry with those. And so in that way, I dispel the anger based on the perception of the person. So it's really my perception of the person that causes the anger to arise. But when we get beyond this sort of diluted perception and look at the person as constituted by the 6 elements, And then when we see the person in terms of the 6 elements, then we see that there's no substantial self there, but it's just the coming together of these 6 elements. And so then the sort of anger has no foundation upon which to rest. It sort of just dissipates into air.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll take one question, then we'll have to break for the lunch.
What we discussed, what you were explaining to them is theoretically correct. And we all
Wait, take the microphone so it gets...
we all try to practice it, Bhante. But knowing it and practicing it does not mean that you are enlightened, though, isn't it?
That is actually true. That's a good point. That just knowing this, sort of knowing it conceptually,
We all know it,
but theoretically doesn't mean that one is enlightened. I mean, this is a very true point. So I guess one would have to say that being able to answer correctly is not really sufficient as a mark of attainment. In fact, this is what, through the centuries always creates the problem with certifying the attainments of others, or even certifying one's own attainment, because one could have some very powerful, dramatic, maybe meditative experience, and then one knows these things theoretically, and so one starts interpreting one's experience in terms of these principles, and then one could jump prematurely to the conclusion, therefore I'm enlightened. Even in Zen Buddhism, where they have these sort of incomprehensible puzzles, like the sound of one hand clapping, jumping off the foot of a 100-foot pole without getting hurt. I think that there are books of answers to them. So if you want to get certified as having a Zen enlightenment, you get the book and you read the answers. So then when the Zen master asks you that difficult question, you can come up with the right answer. Okay, we'll stop and then we'll come back 12:15, or maybe because we have to walk a little ways down. We'll see, 12:30 maybe we'll start. We'll have about 20-minute question and answer. Okay, we end with the sharing of the merits. Okay, so we're going to share the merits with the devas, that's the deities, the nagas, the dragon spirits, the bhutas, the fair spirits, asking them to rejoice in the merits, to protect the world, to protect the Dharma, the teaching, to protect ourselves and others. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahitika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu sasanam. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahitika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu desanam. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahitika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu mam parang. Etavatacham hehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe devanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya sabbe bhutanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya sabbe satanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya Bhavagopadaya vichihetato etantare satakayupapana rupi arupi cha sanya sanyino dukkha pamuchantu pusantu nibbutting. Okay, before we leave, I just have a few announcements. Okay, one announcement. You might know that Chuang Monastery is maintained by an organization called BAUS, B-A-U-S, the Buddhist Association of the United States. And next month, the weekend of May 24th and 25th, BAUS will be celebrating its 50th anniversary. And now, of course, everybody's invited, but there's a need for volunteers, various tasks to be performed during that celebration. And so if anybody was interested in volunteering, who should they contact? You? Or they can go to the office? Who should they speak to in the office? This would be Yoka or Amma? Wang Mei. Yeah, you can just go to the office and you'll see one woman right to the left when you go in is Ang Mei. That's her name? Wang Mei. And, or Yoka, who's on the further desk. And you just give your contact information. And really, if you're free that weekend and you would like to volunteer, we really do need help. Another announcement, I've been speaking about being not attracted, not repelled, but you know, we have an organization called Buddhist Global Relief, and later this month, we're having a concert to feed the hungry. This will be a jazz concert featuring some world-renowned jazz artists. One is Esperanza Spalding and Kenny Werner. And this concert will be on April 25th in New York City, the Interchurch Center. They're like postcards here you have to register online to acquire tickets, or you can call, I think, for tickets, or write. But I'm going to leave these cards on the table here. So if you're interested, you pick up a card. And was there something else that I had to announce? Oh, next weekend or next Friday, they're starting a meditation retreat here. I think registration is still open. It's an 8-day retreat on the 4 divine abodes: loving kindness, compassion, altruistic joy, and equanimity. So if you're interested to participate, you can also go to the office to register for the retreat. We'll have a class next Saturday. So I'm going to join the retreat, but I'll join Saturday afternoon because I don't want to cancel. I'm not going to have the class on the 19th because that will be the retreat will be going will be in full steam then. And I don't want to cancel 2 classes in a row. So we'll have a class next Saturday, but we won't have the class on the 19th. The class after that will be on the 26th. Okay, and then we come back here, as I said, at 12:30 for about 20 minutes, half an hour discussion, question and answers discussion. Okay, so thank you for your attention. And we end with 3 bows to the Buddha. Okay, 1, 2, 3.